I think the secret to pivoting, to shifting, to creating those changes is twofold. One, it's figuring out how to mourn the identity that you're saying goodbye to. Loss accompanies everything in our lives. Great things. I love being a dad. And I remember my kids were little, I miss sleep and I miss clothes that didn't have stains on it. I love being married and I miss the ability to make choices on my own. Right. So all great things have loss. And when we don't honor that loss or pay attention to it, it metastasizes into resentment and other horrible things. So we have to tell the story of our leaving, of our shift. We need to honor that chapter in our life and love it. And then we need to tell a new story about who we're going to be. We don't have to be as we are. That's effing liberating. And it's scary because what that means is because we can be different, we then have an obligation to change and to grow. And so I think pivots are about honoring the story that you're saying goodbye to and figuring out what that new story is.
Today's guest is Dr. Eric Dawson. He has followed a winding path: bartender, electron-microscopist, summer camp director, and even driver for the author of Curious George. But it was in Boston public housing complex, organizing around disability awareness, where his purpose started to take shape. Now co-founder and CEO of Rivet, Eric leads a social impact brand powered by Gen Z to drive global change. With 3 Harvard degrees and a doctorate from NYU, he built his first consumer-facing microfinancing platform for youth-led innovation. In this episode, we'll talk about his leap from academia to bold entrepreneurship to healing power of youth imagination, and why an honest life often means taking the hard path. Welcome, Eric.
Steven, it's good to see you. We've known each other for a long, long time.
We do.
Thank you.
We met when you were leading peace games, which I thought was such a fantastic approach to teaching kids about peacemaking. Maybe you can share that impetus and what the thought behind it was.
So I got a scholarship to go to college, which opened up a lot of doors for me. So I started at Harvard in 1992. And so many of the responses to dealing with this epidemic, which is true for all epidemics, is they looked at young people as problems that we had to fix. So, we were medicating young people as a society. We were incarcerating young people. We were turning our schools into prisons. And the idea behind peace games and then peace first was, what if we understood young people not just as victims or perpetrators, but as change agents? What if the solutions to the problems of community violence actually are within the innovation and ingenuity of young people? What started as a 3-week program with Harvard students going to teach cooperation, communication, problem solving in Boston area 5th and 6th grade classrooms grew into a global movement working across 160 some countries, really unleashing young people's moral imaginations. And so the theory of change was quite simple. If you look across history, every significant shift that's made the world a kinder, fairer, more just, more loving place, young people have been at the center of it. They've been the imaginers, they've been the drivers, they've been the leaders, they've been the muscle behind it. If you look at some of the more successful social innovation platforms in the United States, City or Teach for America, Kiva, the average age of their founder was probably 24, 25. Look at the 5 largest companies on the planet by market cap. The average age of their founder was 25 when they started. So there's something powerful about youth. They're not stuck in silos of thinking. They're close to problems, and they've got a high risk tolerance. Think about when you started your firm. I don't remember how old you were, but you're younger than you are now. And they're just risks you can take. Right? And so the idea behind Peace Games and Peace First was, how do we unleash young people's compassion and creativity to solve problems, with a particular focus on young people who don't have access to capital.
Yeah. I think if I remember correctly, it was also what I really loved was that you said that violence is not something that is natural to us. Violence is taught. So because violence is taught, we can also teach how to make peace.
I was running a summer camp here in Boston, working with this amazing group of 7 and 8-year-olds. But there were kids who experienced violence in their lives. And I remember one day we were cleaning up the playground in a housing development, and the students and I came across a sick cat that was clearly not well and was dying. And being a responsible adult, I said, look, don't touch this. I'll call someone to get help after camp. After camp, I got busy. And by the time I had called animal control and gone back, a few of the students had come back and had picked up rocks from a construction project that was going on and had stoned this sick animal to death. But I remember sitting down with this group of, again, smart, beautiful kids and asking them why they decided to do this act of violence, why they decided to hurt this animal. And not in the way that we adults often ask kids, where we say why, just really curious. And what they said changed my life. They said, Eric, that's what the big boys were doing. So these beautiful, loving 7, 8-year-olds were watching the big boys in their community hurt animals. And so that's what they were learning. That's what you do when you see an animal. You throw stones at it. And we have a lot of terrible modeling in our culture of big boys and girls who do really crappy things to other humans. And young people are sponges, right? Yeah. This idea was if we can teach and model violence, whether that's physical violence, emotional violence, bullying, excluding people, that's amazing, because that means we can also teach peace. We can teach tolerance. We can teach love. We can model it. And in fact, not only can we, but we have to. We have an obligation to.
Yeah, let's dissect that a little bit. I think there's so much truth and amazing things in that. So also what I'm hearing is this, right? And this is maybe me projecting into this, but what you're also saying is that people are not bad, but people do bad things, that we need to separate that. I think that's very powerful lesson, specific in the times that we're now, where we very easily are vilifying the other because we don't understand them and we don't agree with, and rightfully so, don't often agree with their behavior because they can be violent or can really hurt other people. I think is that fundamentally your belief?
I think what you're touching on that's so important is how destructive shame is. Mm-hmm. As a driver of what we do to humans. I used to think the opposite of love was hate. That was sort of my dualism. But I actually think the opposite of love is shame. Love is all about being seen, and shame is all about being erased. Again, we're both dads. And so I think about the difference when our kiddos do something that we don't like. The difference between saying what you did was wrong or what you did was bad and you are bad. Yes. It's subtle, but it's really, really important. Dr. James Gilligan is a psychiatrist. He wrote a book called Violence, where basically he interviewed men. They were all men who'd committed horrible, horrible crimes and were locked up in jail here in Massachusetts. And what he learned was that for many of them, in their own kind of twisted way of thinking, were looking for some kind of redemption and justice to things that had been done to them. And they all talked about shame. They all talked about often abuse, often sexual abuse when they were young, that created in them this deep pit of shame that they are bad, that they are unworthy. It is impossible to do good, worthy things if the story you tell about yourself is you were unworthy or disposable or discarded.
I think a lot of things that we're talking about are really around spirituality. And you decided many years ago that you were going to lean into your spirituality and actually get a degree in it. Can you talk about that? Maybe not a pivot, but it's an extension of the work that you have already done or you were already doing with Peace Games.
About 20 years ago, I lost one of my students to gun violence. And I remember being at his funeral and standing in front of his older sister, who I knew and cared about, who had raised him like a mother, and realizing that I had nothing to offer her, Steven. I've spent my life solving problems. You have spent your professional career solving problems. That's what so many of us do, right? We fix things. And then, of course, life hands you something that you can't fix. You can't fix a sick parent. You can't fix a dead 17-year-old. And all you can do is bear witness to it. To stand in front of a grieving older sister and say, I see you, I'm here with you. I had no idea how to do that. And it goes against so much of the training we get as humans. And let's be honest, so much training that we get as men about our value, right? How many of us have had our partners come up and say, actually, I don't want you to fix this. I just want you to listen. Yeah. I applied to go to divinity school. And it was interesting that the weekend I got in, my wife found out she was pregnant with our third. You know, we had two young kids. Our oldest was 5. Our youngest was 6 months, 7 months. And this is what I felt called to do. And you know, I know calling can be such a complex word. But the way I think about those kinds of vocations is there's something that stirs within us and there's something that stirs outside of us, right? There's something more than us. It could be a community, it could be our friends, it could be our family, it could be something divine that's speaking to something that feels really deep. I studied pastoral care and counseling with a focus on death and dying. I got trained as a hospital chaplain. So I did my training in a level 1 trauma center here in Boston. And I took a sabbatical from work for that training. I held people's hands as they died. I brought them prayer shawls, candles, whatever it was that they needed. And I'll say, Steven, it was the most useful I've ever felt in my life.
I think it's such an important thing that you say about your calling. I feel that I finally found my calling in helping people and making people's lives better. And I recently had this experience where I almost had my life go in front of me, pass in front of me. Now, of course, not in my entire life, but certain elements of my life, and specifically the ones that were hard for me. You know, some of my trauma that I had when I was a child, a lot of difficulties I had when I was a teen, and then the financial crisis. You know, almost losing my business, a horrible divorce that I've had. You know, then adopting a child that has severe special needs. So many things in my life which might be people would interpret as hardships. And at the moment, I felt it was definitely a hardship. But what I realized in that moment was that this made me who I am today.
That's right.
And it was all a preparation for me becoming the person that I am now, to be able to have the empathy, to be able to see people, to be able to work with them and help them create better, more meaningful lives for them. And so in turn, my life is more meaningful, and I'm able now to help people identify what their calling is so that they can live more meaningful lives.
That's right. I love that. The
So
Quakers have this wonderful concept called eldering, coming from being an elder, and it's not connected to age, but it's a role that you play in a leader's life. So someone who's moving often into a new leadership position will find someone to help elder them, to help accompany their leadership. And I think about your trajectory, Steven, of, you know, having been a leader, having built companies, and, you know, the pain, the experience, like all that stuff flashing in front of you, that shaped you, that molded you, is what the ancients called wisdom. And what a gift to be able to take that wisdom and to accompany or elder folks who are on these journeys. I think that's amazing.
And I think it goes back to one of the things that you said earlier. You were saying about the youth movement and about, you know, the top 3 companies right now were started by people in their 20s. And, you know, I started my thing when I was in my 20s, and you started Peace Game when you were in your 20s. And then I was like, well, what's our purpose then? And I think that this is exactly what the purpose has to become, and how we have to transform in middle age, right? We can't do the things that we used to do because we have too much to lose, and also we have too much perspective, right? So we know all the reasons why it can't work. And that is valuable. And that is, yes, hopefully that is wisdom. And so we need to transition our careers into things where we can provide that wisdom and guidance to those people that have that spirit and that, you know, enthusiasm and naivete to be able to do great and amazing things.
So much of the lessons that folks like you and I, and probably many of your listeners, get about what leadership looks like, it's about taking up space. It's about becoming bigger. It's about being on stage. And what if leadership, holiness, was actually about becoming smaller, about diminishing, not stepping out, not withdrawing, but creating absences so that others can grow, right? So others can get their roots planted. And I do think we're at an interesting inflection point. You know, many of us will move from what do I get to what can I give?
Yes.
But it's much harder to move from what can I give to what am I willing to give up? And I do think we're at a moment, whether we're talking about the climate crisis, whether we're talking about a lack of investment in public schools and public places, where we do need to start asking, what will I give up so that other people can live? What will I give up so other people can lead? Am I comfortable having a little less money so that others can eat tonight? Am I comfortable stepping away from a cool leadership position to create opportunity for someone else? Those aren't easy questions and they're not easy answers.
So I wanted to talk with you about the challenge of living your life on your terms. And I think the reason why I brought you on the podcast, I mean, there are so many, but that's one of the main things, because I always viewed you as somebody that was very unapologetically you and living your life. And you have a large family, right? And that you need to take care of, and you've made very deliberate choices. And as you said, you gave things up. Talk to me about the things that you gave up and the challenge in making those trade-offs.
We are the stories that we tell at the end of the day. We're the stories we tell about ourselves. We're the stories we tell about the world. And we are the stories that the world tells about us. There's a really important story that I hold that the more my life is for other people, the happier I am. The more connected I feel, the more grounded I feel. I don't believe in altruism. I don't believe in selflessness. It is what has fed and sustained me. I wrote a book a couple years ago, which was like a how-to guide for young change makers, for middle readers, 10, 11-year-olds. And as part of that, I got to go on a book tour. This was 2018. So I did 40 book events all over the country and a couple of other countries. And the beautiful part of it was I got to hang out and see so many of my classmates. And look, Harvard students are not necessarily an accurate cross-section of the world, but they are a really interesting group of people. And so I got to see dozens and dozens of contemporaries, many of whom I hadn't talked to since we graduated. And I have to say, Steven, what I left from those conversations was a real deep sense of melancholy. So there were people who thought they would get to a certain place, like they told a story of success, and then they didn't get there, and they were feeling badly about that. The people worked their entire lives, law school, business school, medical school, to get someplace, and they got there and they hated it. And then, of course, there are folks who had this dream to get someplace, they got there and they loved it, and they were terrified of losing it. I think the hardest thing that we have as humans is to change our stories, is to be able to tell different stories about who we are. It's funny, I think of myself as an innovator. I think of myself as a risk taker, as an entrepreneur. I had the same job from age 18 to 48. So 30 years, I had the same job. I married the woman I dated in college. My kids go to the same public schools I volunteered at 30 years ago. As big as my world's become, it's actually quite small. And I remember when I made the decision to leave Peace First, partly to create a leadership opportunity for another leader. I was sitting at my desk. It was about 6 months before my exit. I just started sobbing one day. And not like what I call cool man tears. We look off in the distance and a single tear trickles down your cheek as you think about big things. This was like snot coming out, tears coming down. And I realized that I was mourning all of these things that I had given up.
Yeah.
A certain amount of financial security, time with my kids to build and drive and create this organization. Because as long as I was working there, there was always another day to redeem that loss, like to have that big breakthrough or get that $10 million gift. And ending meant that the bill was due. Like there was an accounting that was taking place. And the core question was, what have I done with my life? The Buddhist in me knows that question is impossible to ask and answer because everything is impermanent. In that sense, nothing really matters, and that's liberating. But the guy who spent 30 years of his life trying to build something just couldn't get there. And so I spent the next couple of months doing actually a podcast of talking to people that had built Peace Games and Peace First over the past 30 years and just telling those stories about what has mattered. That was really helpful in terms of helping me let go of an identity that I'd held for 30 years to make meaning of what has happened.
I think that this is the theme of our generation. What you said, I think, is very true, and I see this with all of my clients, my pro bono clients, which work um, in social enterprises, and my paying clients, and it is that we're at this stage in our lives where we still have kids that we're caring for. We also have aging parents that are declining very quickly, and we need to take care of them, and that's very hard. And then we have these jobs that are often very complicated, and very time consuming. And we're at this point where we're like, this can't be it. And I think that we did everything right, what we were supposed to do, right? What people told us that we should be doing. And then we get to this point where we're in this midlife and we're like, it somehow is not adding up. But then, as you said, very, very rightfully so, is to then make that pivot is so difficult because we've created this identity of who we are. And so the people that, as you said, right, some people not happy where they are, some people are happy, but then so afraid of giving up what they or losing what they have. I think it's a very universal story for our generation, and it's very important for us to figure out how to be able to let go, how to be able to reimagine ourselves. And as part of reimagining ourselves, really becoming passionate about helping others, or what do we have to give to the world, as you said, rather than how can we take more? Because ultimately, we're not going to be satisfied if we continue to take, because there's always more to take. So, maybe you make your first million and then you want to make 10, or, you get this title and you want to have the next, or, you get 1,000 followers on YouTube and then you want, 10,000 or whatever that might be. Those metrics just don't work, and it has to come from the inside rather than the outside. Or how are you learning how to get this internal validation rather than the external validation?
One of the things the Buddha teaches us is that our suffering comes from misaligned expectation. I love movies. When you have a movie you really, really want to see because you think it's going to be awesome, and it's good, but it's not great, and you just feel disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
Or your kids take you to see Minions 4 and you're like, this is going to be terrible. It's not bad. And so you really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Our lives are lived in the delta between what we expect and what we get. And I think the secret is to let go of the need for anything to be anything. There's a reason they call these things practices, right? So I am one of the least enlightened people you will ever meet. Like, I cling to the things I'm not supposed to cling to. I worry I'm losing my hand. Like, all of the things that I know don't matter. Spoiler alert, I'm a fully human dude living in this moment in time. And so I think the exercise is really to just continually check in with ourselves and ask, like, what's important here?
Yeah.
I guarantee to everyone listening that the people for whom you really matter, and I mean like in your heart really matter, if you're lucky, you can count them on one or two hands.
Yeah.
Those are often the people who get the least amount of our attention and
Absolutely.
our time and our energy. People often come to me for job advice, which I find incredibly funny because I've applied for one job in my life, and that was Burger King when I was 14. I remember sitting across from a young person in his late 20s who just finished up at Harvard Law School, just gotten married, and he had these three great options in front of him. A fellowship to reimagine the South African justice system, a Skadden fellowship, and I think the third was clerking for a Supreme Court justice. And he looked at me with tears and he said, "Tell me, Eric, which of these three paths will make the biggest difference in the world?" Like, he was torn up because he wanted to do good. And I remember pausing, I remember looking at him and I said, just figure out how to be a good husband. Like, get that figured out. Give up your seat to someone on the subway just to make their day. Vote. We often tell the story of impact and change in these big, broad brushstrokes. We talk about the civil rights movement. We talk about Dr. King. We talk about Selma. That wasn't the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was hundreds of thousands of people, by the way, most often young people and women, sitting in church pews and around kitchen tables deciding they were going to be different. All changes lived in the daily. by those daily decisions we make about where we live, where we send our kids to school, what we eat, how we treat the person at the counter at the airport when our plane is late. These are the accumulative things that we do that have impact. Get those things right, everything else is commentary.
Thank you for that. I think the other challenge too is that even the internal validation, your own validation and your own value system of the value that you're adding to the world is often attached to these expectations that we have of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So if I can't accomplish what I want to accomplish, then I am a failure. So that's not even externally people thinking that I'm a failure, but it's this internal expectation. And that, I think, is also the hard part too, of letting go of outcomes and expectations and really focusing on, as you said, the day to day and just being a good human. And when we focus on being a good human, everything else will come into place.
Right. So it's all the delta, right? It's the pressure we put on ourselves to be something and then how we experience ourselves, which is complicated and human.
Yes. I would love to continue talking to you for hours. I didn't ask any of the questions that I was going to ask you, which I love to have conversations like that because it takes us to where it takes us. And I think, you were able to give me a lot of great insights that are either affirming or new for me that I will take with me and make me a better person. And I hope that will be true for others as well.
Thanks, Steven. Appreciate you.